To the debate, we are using the really profound insights of cybernetics today, particularly the work of Stafford Beer, to try and dissect one of the most pressing social issues of our time. This overwhelming sense of alienation and the increasingly loud collective dissent that's coming from contemporary youth. This isn't just about TikTok trends or, generational preferences. It's really about systemic structure.
Mm-hmm. And when Beer looked at systems, he coined this fundamental concept of variety, which put simply is just the number of possible states a system, or, in our case, society, can possess. And today, that concept really gives us, I think, the perfect framework to understand why so many people, especially those under 40, feel so deeply unsettled and, frankly, angry.
Behind this generational demand for autonomy, is it primarily the obsolete reductionist organizational frameworks, what I'm calling systemic failure? Or is it the unprecedented explosive variety and the sort of social fragmentation that's followed, introduced by modern digital technology?
Right. Two very different potential causes.
Yes. And I'll argue that the anger we're seeing is a profoundly rational response. It's a reaction to fundamental structural and economic failures driven by the system's deliberate, and I stress deliberate, attenuation of human potential and choice.
Okay. And I come at it from a slightly different angle. While I absolutely see the systemic failures you're talking about, they're undeniable, I believe the core crisis actually stems from uncontrolled chaos. We're grappling with explosive variety that's just exceeding the capacity of both our institutions and the individual mind to regulate. And this leads, I think, to catastrophic instability and fragmentation that younger generations are particularly ill-equipped to navigate.
Okay, so my perspective is that this current wave of dissent, it isn't nihilism, it's not laziness. It's really a clear cybernetic rejection of a subtle kind of tyranny. Stafford Beer once observed that, most people have no more hope of truly expressing themselves in their own spirit than of jumping over the moon. And that's true even in societies we call free. The primary mechanism of this oppression, in my view, is what Beer termed variety attenuation. Now, for anyone unfamiliar, it essentially means the system actively degrades and debases the vast variety of human potential. I mean, the limitless things a human being could potentially be or do to a very narrow, pre-approved range of perceived choices.
Okay.
And we see this, I think, most vividly in the crushing economic squeeze applied to younger generations. I mean, think about it. Every newborn child in the U.S., for instance, is immediately responsible for something like, $150,000 of the national debt. That massive burden is placed upon them before they ever even take a step. This translates directly into, limited career paths, totally inaccessible housing, and a complete lack of genuine choice in how they spend their most human activity, their life and their labor. They are, as Beer might say, the innocent inheritors of dysfunctional reductionist organizational models. These are structures designed, frankly, for the 1950s that are entirely out of gear with the rate at which the expanding world is operating. So their structural revolt is, it's necessitated by the system's own design.
That's a very interesting point, and the generational economic squeeze is certainly real, absolutely. But I would frame the immediate cause of the chaos slightly differently. While the structures are clearly obsolete, the defining reality for this generation, I believe, is explosive variety.
Okay.
When I say explosive variety, I mean the sheer number of possible states the modern technological system possesses. This constant flood of information, opinions, crises, choices. It's simply uncontainable by structures designed centuries ago. This variety produces perturbations, shocks to the system, at a rate that's much faster than the relaxation time of our institutions.
Right. The time to settle down.
Exactly.
The relaxation time is the time it takes for an institution or a system to settle back down and actually learn after a shock. But because the shocks are coming so incredibly fast now, think about global news cycles, instant financial crashes, endless political crises, the system never actually settles. It's forced into this perpetual oscillation, which makes it utterly incapable of learning, adapting, or reforming itself in any meaningful way.
Mm-hmm.
And this institutional paralysis is where the crisis really hits the individual. We can observe a critical phase transition, actually, roughly around 2012. This is when global digital connectivity hit a kind of peak, but this coincided catastrophically with a steep decline in social cohesion.
This instability isn't just abstract, it manifests as measurable mental health decline, affective polarization, all these things we see. Individuals suffer a kind of variety overload. They often lack the requisite variety, that's the necessary complexity within their own minds, to even map their environment effectively. They're operating with mental models that are, as Beer vividly described it, cut off at the knees.
Okay, but this brings us directly to the mechanism of deflection, doesn't it? And the role of technology. Why do governmental systems, the same ones wrestling with these debt crises and structural obsolescence, I mean the internet or social media for the youth's supposed nihilism?
Well,
Beer suggests, and I think he's right, that the easiest maneuver for obsolete institutions is to blame external complexity, technology, as a sort of juju or scapegoat. It's a classic deflection maneuver, isn't it? It hides the true culprit, the obsolete design of the organizational framework itself. It allows them to scapegoat the digital realm instead of admitting that the fundamental structures of governance and economy are just, well, they're broken. It's the oldest trick in the book. When the system is failing internally, point to the biggest, fastest-moving external piece you can find.
I'm sorry, but I don't quite buy that it's merely a scapegoat. I think it's both. It's a symptom and a cause. While the institutional failure is the root, you're right, technology is functionally exacerbating the fragmentation, even if the original structures are failing. The internet isn't just some external complexity anymore, it is now the very substrate of this variety crisis.
But is it the driver?
Well, consider the new tools. AI, large language models. They promise infinite information, right? But in practice, what do they deliver? Homogeneous, pre-existing, non-novel information. They provide easy, low cognitive load answers. And this, I argue, deprives the user's brain of the necessary friction, the cognitive load needed for genuine learning and critical thinking. It becomes a variety constraint, ironically disguised as infinite possibility. It reinforces existing biases, it fragments reality further, making collective action almost impossible.
Yet if this generation feels constraints, as I argue, what banner can unite them? We see this collective demand for autonomy crystallizing, well, not around traditional political parties or manifestos, but around a fictional pirate flag, the Jolly Roger from the popular...
The straw hat logo.
Exactly. This, to me, is a clear, collective cybernetic demand for the restoration of autonomy, for release from these systemic constraints. It is a powerful symbol of revolt against the shared experience of variety reduction. They're seeking freedom, friendship, fortune, but outside the established system. And crucially, it speaks directly to the generational split we're talking about.
How so?
Those under 40, millennials, Gen Z, who side with this flag, they are rejecting what could be called the nostalgic pathology of the over 50 crowd, the boomers, and older Gen X who seem to be frantically clutching at an idealized, often fictitious version of mid-century America before they die off. They're trying to preserve their assets, their worldview. The pirate banner unites those who recognize they've been fundamentally excluded from the current system's benefits and feel they have to find their own path. It's a rational choice, a symbol of necessary structural revolt against a generation clinging too hard to the past.
That's a very compelling argument, and I absolutely agree about the generational divide and the deep frustration over economic alienation. I find that interpretation of the nostalgic pathology, this idea that older generations are almost consciously trying to preserve a 1950s-era structure at the expense of the future, unsettlingly accurate, actually.
Right.
However, the specific choice of a fictional, non-political banner like the straw hat logo, for me, that demonstrates the sheer depth of the societal breakdown caused by the system's profound instability. The chaos I mentioned has led to a near total collapse of shared understanding and institutional trust. They are almost forced to rally around an imagined symbol fighting an imagined authoritarian world government from a manga, because they can't actually agree at a tangible political framework or a real-world institution to believe in or fight for.
But the desire for autonomy is real.
The desire is absolutely real, but the explosive variety ensures that every potential coalition fragments almost immediately. Misperceptions, amplified constantly by algorithmically curated content, especially post-2012, drive conflict over imagined disagreements more often than real ones. Their fight for autonomy is completely legitimate, but the tools they have for collective action are fundamentally fractured by the very digital landscape that allows them to connect in the first place.
I would argue, though, the key problem here is the totalitarian nature in Beer's sense of the existing system's closure. The structure defines itself, right? And anything that proposes genuine, deep structural change, like, say, abandoning debt-based economics or radically reforming political representation, is automatically categorized by the system as a parasite or a virus. It must be rejected or suppressed. The system fundamentally refuses to allow the variety needed for its own genuine adaptation.
Okay.
And this is precisely why a truce is simply not going to happen between these generations, or between the dissenters and the system. The reductionist, obsolete structures we keep perpetuating in our education system, in governance, in economics, these are the very mechanisms creating the mess, and they trap us inside them. The system needs to allow fundamental change, but its very design, its closure, precludes it.
I see the exact same structural rigidity. I absolutely do. But I view it primarily as a consequence of the perpetual oscillation caused by explosive variety. We established earlier that institutions are trapped in constant crisis management, right? They're preoccupied with the immediate week, maybe the month, unable to maintain a stable reference point. They essentially lose the institutional memory, the recollection of what stability or effective learning even means.
So they can't change because they're too busy reacting?
Precisely. Experimentation, which is the basis of any true change with your feet, is constantly shifting. The explosive rate of change itself ensures the structures cannot adapt quickly enough to integrate the demands of the youth or anyone else proposing change. It is the chaos preventing necessary evolution, which then locks us into this rigidity rather than, perhaps, active malice preventing necessary change.
Ultimately, then, what we are observing is that the despair of the young, it's not nihilism. I maintain it is a profoundly rational, cybernetic rejection of a subtle, pervasive tyranny that intentionally squeezes their options and degrades their human potential, all for the sake of maintaining obsolete institutional stability. They are rejecting intentional variety reduction.
And my conclusion remains that the underlying crisis is one of overwhelming scale. We are simply overwhelmed by explosive variety. This leads to catastrophic systemic instability and a fragmented reality that prevents either institutions or individuals from finding a stable reference point or a shared pathway for collective action and genuine learning. They are fighting the chaos, yes, but that chaos makes it nearly impossible to solve the very real issues of constraint and systemic failure that you highlight.
This debate then really illuminates whether this generational conflict is fundamentally a rational response to intentionally reduced choice, what we could call a tyranny of attenuation.
Or if it's a desperate scramble against exponentially complex chaos, a kind of tyranny of variety overload.
Exactly, and I think we have to view these modern conflicts through that dual lens, structure and complexity, to fully appreciate the incredibly difficult position we find ourselves in, and to understand why these demands for autonomy are both so urgent and, at least currently, seem so deeply fractured.